Hello, my name is Fiona Kenyon. I'm a scientific researcher at the Modern Research Institute, and I'm also the project lead of the Smart Sheep project, the Innovate UK funded project. And today I'd like to tell you a little bit about targeted selective treatment, the background of it, the theory, how it works, and what we've done to apply this in practice, and the output from some experimental trials that we've done. So, targeted selective treatment is a way to apply wormers to control roundworms. And as you know, roundworms are everywhere. They're present in most of the grasslands that our livestock graze on, and that's how our livestock get infected. So infection affects productivity, carcass quality, and we know that it affects the value at sale. And these worm infections are not made up of a single worm species, but a multiple worm species that live in a community within the whole gastrointestinal tract of the animals. When we look at infected animals, then generally it's subclinical disease is common. So it's not that we can easily see all the animals that have been affected. So it's subclinical disease, which tends to mean a slowdown in growth rates, which can mean it can be quite hidden for some time. And recent estimates suggest that there's a significant cost to the UK meat sheep industry of these infections of up to £15 million in lost production and £27 million in treatment. Now, we treat these infections using wormers, but we know that wormer resistance is common. There's 5 classes that we can use at the moment in the UK, but we also know that the majority of farms have worms that are resistant to some of the wormers that are available. A recent study, the WARD project, found that 43% of farms had worms that were resistant to 3 or more wormer classes. So that's a significant amount of wormer resistance available. And of course, that has been the selection for resistance and how that occurs. So we need to find sustainable ways of producing sheep while not developing any more resistance. And the theory behind these is that perhaps we don't need to treat all animals in a group at the same time. So we know that 80% of the worms are found in only about 20% of the sheep. So there's a vast number of your sheep that are carrying quite low burdens of parasites at any given time and therefore don't need to be wormed. So the idea behind this targeted selective treatment, or TST, is that it's a roundworm control method where wormer is given only to those animals that will benefit from that treatment. And the idea is to reduce the amount of wormer used, which will reduce the selection pressure on the worms so that the rate of wormer resistance is slowed. And studies have looked at a number of ways to identify animals that need wormer. But here in the UK fat lamb production system, short-term weight gain offers simple, quick and effective identification of animals that need treatment. And I'll show you how we do that later on. What we'd like to think is that we can make the wormers work harder for us by focusing treatment on those lambs that will actually respond in a positive way in terms of weight gain, because that's our production criteria. They'll respond positively with an increased efficiency of production. And what we're looking here really is this graph where we see along the x-axis we have how well the animals are performing prior to given wormer, with 1 being equivalent to 100%, so performing as well as they expect they could. And on the y-axis we have the response to treatment. So all these dots are individual animals that have been wormed. And if you look at the yellow circle, you can see that these animals were performing really well before treatment, so 80, 75 to 100% production efficiency. And once they get treated, then not many of them are above that green line, suggesting that they don't have an increase in performance post-worming. If we look at the dots circled in the blue circles, you can see that these animals were performing very poorly, and post-wormer, they've actually had significant increases in productivity. And it's those animals that we think we should be targeting to use our wormers on, because we're actually going to see a benefit to the animals and to us from those treatments. And we don't see any benefits from treating the animals circled in yellow. So that's a good idea, that we can identify these different types of animals. But how does the TST actually work to slow wormer resistance? Well, when you look at your animals in the fields grazing, we can think that there's worms present in both the animals and on pasture. And we know that the animals pick up eggs from pasture as they graze, they develop into adults in the gut, and they pass out eggs onto pasture that develop into the infected stages. And roughly speaking, there's a similar balance of the proportion of susceptible and resistant worms in sheep and on pasture. Now, when we treat animals with anthelmintic or wormer, the only parasites that survive that treatment are the ones that are resistant. The susceptibles are removed from that population, which means that the only parasites that get passed out onto pasture are those that have survived that treatment and are therefore resistant. This is assuming that you've given the treatment using correctly calibrated equipment and the drugs have been stored properly. And over time, these resistant eggs will develop into larvae and they will increase the proportion of resistant larvae on your pastures compared to if the treatment hadn't happened. And so eventually we get the proportion of resistant worms increases in your population, which means the proportion of worms that your animals are grazing increases, and therefore your drugs will start to fail. If we treat just individual animals within a group, so we just treat, say, this animal at the top, then of course the susceptible animals are removed again, but the impact of these resistant parasites laying eggs into your general population is much lower. So it's a much lower impact of that treatment on your parasite population as a whole. And that's how we believe that TST can help to slow the development of resistance. So, I mean, that sounds good. We've got an idea of things that we could look to. We want to identify these animals that aren't performing very well. And we know that by doing this and just treating individuals, we hope that we'll slow down the development of that resistance. So how can we set the short-term weight targets to apply TST? Well, some studies were done many years ago now when we were looking at the effect of worm infection on weight gain. And if you can see here, we've got animals that were in a house trial and we monitored their weight gain over a period of 14 weeks. At the end of the trial, there was a significant difference between the control animals in blue and the infected animals in green. But what was also interesting is that we monitored their egg count, and their egg count at 6 weeks post-treatment had an egg count of about 300 eggs per gram. But what we were really interested in is this effect on weight gain when the egg counts are low. So you can see this divergence between the blue and the green lines. And it's that, could we target that, which might be able to pull this checking growth here, reduce that, and allow animals to grow at a much more similar rate to those control animals. And how could we do that? Well, we know that weight gain can be a proxy for production efficiency. So using nutritional first principle equations to convert production efficiency into weight gain allowed us to develop this calculation or model called the happy factor. And basically the happy factor allows us to set a minimum target gain depending on food availability, because we can't expect animals to grow if there's no food in front of them. The initial lamb weight, because we can't expect all animals to gain the same amount of weight if some are lighter or heavier than others. And then in practice, we'd like to use EID to identify the animals, so we have individual animal records, and an electronic weigh crate and weigh head that allows this information to be linked up together, and then we can see those treatment decisions instantly and make a pen-side approach. So using our happy factor, and remembering this graph from previously, if we set when we want to treat our animals here, which is identifying the majority of animals that were underperforming, you see that we identify 88% of animals that would have responded to treatment. And on the other side, the animals that we leave untreated, 74% of those would not have been expected to respond to treatment. So we think it's a sensitive approach. So we've tested this at a long-term field study at Morden Research Institute, and we had 40 lambs in each of 4 ivermectin treatment groups on a set stocked paddock over 5 years, 6 years. We collected weight and fecal samples fortnightly to do worm egg counts, and we looked at 4 different controlled strategies. So we had monthly, where all lambs were dosed each month. We had our targeted selective treatment, or TST, which we were using the happy factor to predict lamb growth rates, and treating only that failed to reach the weight targets. We had a strategic approach where all lambs were treated at weaning and 6 weeks later, or we had a clinical sign where all lambs were treated and clinical signs that were apparent in some lambs. From these results, so these are mean results over the whole course of the experiment, we know that TST reduces wormer use So the TST used 1.8 treatments per animal compared to 4 in the monthly treatment group, for example. It maintains weight gain. So although we reduced the wormer use, we didn't see any effect on weight gain. It can slow wormer resistance. So, for example, the monthly treatment, the wormer efficacy was really reduced, and actually that happened really early on. And so using the TST or the strategic or clinical approaches tended to slow down that development of resistance. And we can also see impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So when you take all of these figures in total, we think that the TST is a way that you can optimize wormer use on farm, taking into account all these approaches. So our field studies showed that drenching on clinical signs leads to a production penalty and a greenhouse gas emissions penalty. Drenching whole group monthly produces strong selection for resistance. A targeted treatment has potential, but only under conditions where you really know what parasites are on your farm and the epidemiology of them. And we think that TST optimised drench use. Can it work on other farms? We've tested it on a variety of other farms, both lowland, hill and upland, and with a variety of different breeds. These studies all compared a routine treatment. So the routine treatment was whatever the farmer thought that they wanted to use. So it could be egg count, it could be a strategic type approach with targeted selective treatment approach. And we found that in all cases there was a significant reduction in the number of doses administered to the TST group compared to the routine treatment group, but there was no significant difference in weight gain or animal performance. So we can really reduce the number of doses that are given without affecting animal performance. So just to summarise, refugia is this idea of maintaining a worm population which is unexposed to antibiotic, and it aims to maintain genes for the susceptibility and dilute the resistant worms onto pasture so that your pasture is maintaining a susceptible parasite population. We know that sustainable control can be achieved by optimising antibiotic use, and studies show that treatments can be reduced with little or no effect on production. I'd like to remind you to check out the YouTube Smart Sheep video channel for other videos relating to this study and some of our outcomes, which I hope you'll appreciate. So I'd just like to finish off by acknowledging the rest of the members of the Innovate UK funded Smart Sheep project, and to thank Innovate for their funding. Thanks very much.